Hello, everyone, and welcome to Advancing Early Childhood Education Outdoor, now virtual roundtable number 2. My name is Iris Berger, and I work with early childhood education at UBC. Just before we begin, perhaps I can invite you to imagine that we're all sitting together around a giant round table, so that we all feel that we are valued participant in this conversation. You're welcome to share your thoughts in the chat and your questions in the Q&A option. Now, I would like to introduce May Sam, who will welcome us to today's event. May comes from Cowichan First Nation. She speaks Halkamenim and is an expert with wool. She makes hats, sweaters, pompons, and more out of her wool that she cards and dyes herself in her backyard that reaches out to a thin tree line. She loves having people join her there to learn all sorts of skills. And May, I would love to come to your backyard one day too. May is also an elder in residence with the University of Victoria and Camosun, and has helped countless students and staff in their post-secondary journey. Please join us, May.
Hello, everyone. I'm so proud to be with you, included in this morning for the opening for Camosun. And for everyone, for all of you there. It's a trying time for us with this COVID. And I just pray that everyone is okay with your work. And with the students, I really hope that you're doing okay. There's no stress over you while you're doing your education. Nothing's going to come before you. I keep my candle on and pray for everyone every day and every night. So no harm will come to anyone with this COVID. It's so important to take care of yourselves and your family, the children, especially the children. And you know, I just love everyone so much. When I speak to the students, they look surprised when I'm finished my speech, but I always say, I love you. I always lay that down on my words with everyone that I speak to. And it just that I care so much. I have my candle on and I pray and I pray and I'm constantly praying. And it's just so important to send the blessings out to you and everyone. Every family, every community are different. The teachings that they have from their families to be patient with the babies. There's times they're cranky. There's times they're really happy and they're little bouncy little sponges. They'll hug you and they surprise you and even teach you something. And it's just that you have to have patience with the babies and just give them all the love in the world. And our teachings here with the little ones, when they get tired and they're crying for their mommy or daddy. And my daughter works at the daycare at the tribal school here, my granddaughter. They hold the baby and try to comfort them, and then they wash their face. My mother-in-law used to wash my daughter's face. She'd have a bottle of water when we're out in a strawberry patch picking berries, and my daughter would be crying at the end of the row. My mother-in-law would go and change her. She says, you keep working, I'll go take care of her. And she'd put the water in the cloth and she'd wash my daughter's face with cold water. And she told me to go nurse her. And that put her to sleep for hours, that cold water. So just knowing in different communities how they take care of their babies. It's really all the love in the world to help them in each and every way. But it's patience and respecting the families that we love so much, that we care. And I'm really happy to be here with you this morning, to be able to do this for you. And I want to say hi, Chika. I say I love you so much, and to really have that blessing in your heart for your work, each and every one, all of you, not excluding anyone. Just really say hi, Chika. Okay. Thank you. Hi, Chika.
Thank you so much, May, for this important message of love and inclusion, and for welcoming us into this place and space of learning with and from each other, and for reminding us about the complexities of our historical context, especially for the topic we're going to be discussing today, the outdoor, the place where we live and share with each other.
The tribal school where my daughter worked up here, she's not working there right now because of the COVID, but they have a little arbor, and the little babies have their drums, and they go up there and they sing. The babies would drum and sing and teach them how to sit and keep still. Even there, they're just little tiny tots. It's so sweet though. To be outdoors. Yeah.
It is about that kind of learning that we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And with gratitude to the care of the land where I live, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. Last week, Morgan Guerin from Musqueam Chief and Council very generously shared with us an important Musqueam teaching. He said, and I quote him with respect, that when you come to a big house, there is a nail on the outside, and you hang up what you thought you knew on that nail first.
Yes.
So that when you go into the house together, you can move forward with a new happy consensus, and you walk away with what you know to be true together. And then it's up to you if you want to pick up what you left on that nail or not. It is with this spirit of open heart and open mind that we would like to invite you to our discussion today. As Dr. Enid Elliott mentioned last week, bringing the conversation about outdoor early childhood education to this public space was a collaborative effort that included Dr. Mariana Brusoni, Dr. Hart Bennick, and graduate student Kaylee Hirsch from UBC, as well as Dr. Shelley McClure, Regional Manager, Island Health, Belva Colestone, an outdoor early childhood educator from Vancouver, and the fearless and most peaceful warrior that I know, Dr. Enid Elliott from Camosun Early Childhood Program. In our journey over the past few months, we were supported by the Lawson Foundation, Island Health, and most recently by the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies. We planned a series of 3 roundtables that bring together local international experiences, research, and stories from leaders from diverse disciplines to ignite curiosity and engage deeply in expanding the vision for outdoor early childhood education, learning from international examples, and opening to the possibility of licensing outdoor early childhood programs in BC. The first roundtable took place last Thursday and was focused on why early childhood education outdoors is needed now, We heard from 4 panelists who collectively reiterated the message about the significance of being outdoors during the pandemic, as transmission of COVID-19 is much lower outdoors, not only for children, but also for adults. And this message was emphasized particularly by Kate Smolina from BC Public Health. Helen Dodd, another one of last week's panelists, professor of child psychology from the UK, spoke about the importance of outdoor to children and families' emotional well-being. While Carrie Green, a professor from the School of Education, University of Alaska, shared some stories from her study with young children that illuminated how being outdoors and learning about where we live and who and what lives there with us is an important element in becoming who we are. Henry Matthias from the Care Inspectorate in Scotland discussed how the decision to license outdoor early childhood program in Scotland was the impetus to rethink the idea of childcare regulation altogether, and to move from thinking about regulation as policing to focus on pedagogy and support to educators. And this very idea brings us to today's session titled Paths to Early Childhood Education Outdoors, as we move our conversation from the why we need outdoor early childhood education to how we move in this direction. I will pass the screen to the very capable hands of our moderator, writer and activist, Ellen Kelsey, who will introduce the panelists for today's discussion and who is also very, very good, we learned last week, at keeping time. Ellen, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Iris, and thank you, May, for that absolutely beautiful welcome. I'm happy to be coming to you from Wasanic territory, unceded territory, and it was just such a beautiful morning that I found myself with this flower, and I think I'm going to use this flower today to help all of us keep on time. We have a seemingly impossible task. We have 4 very, very capable speakers with so much experience, and yet we have a short time together. So I've asked the speakers if they don't mind if I let them know with the flower. So if you see me waving it, it just means that we're getting close to the end of the particular time. So that's what you'll see me doing. It's my utter pleasure to welcome our 4 panelists this morning. We have Danielle Alphonse, who is the BC Regional Innovation Chair for Aboriginal Early Childhood Development at Vancouver Island University in British Columbia. We have Mads Bølling, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at Steno Diabetes Center, Copenhagen in Denmark. We have Aron Bookman, who is a partner at Carfra Lawton, an insurance defense law firm in Victoria, British Columbia. And we have Aliza Yair, who is a program specialist in the Outdoor Preschool Pilot Program of the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I've asked each of the panelists if they could, one by one, answer this question for us. And it's the same question for all 4 of you to begin. The question is, what 3 key insights could you share to make a case for what outdoor early childhood education looks like in your context and why it's needed in this time of COVID-19? And I think we should start with Mads, because Mads is coming from so far away. You're the farthest. Mads?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm from Denmark, a country far away from Canada. However, we have some experiences that we like to share with you. I like to make a case in the beginning. These days, I take my bike to work in the morning, and often I go through this small park, and I see children everywhere, small groups of children, and I'm so glad because I did not see this before the COVID-19. So Denmark was the first country, as I have heard, to reopen schools and kindergartens during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we made some great experiences using the outdoors, because many teachers and kindergarten staff they have not the great experience, but although many kindergarten staff, they say in Denmark that we do use the outdoors, often 1 time a week. So we have several kindergartens in Denmark using the outdoors. However, the use was gaining bigger land in Denmark after the reopening of schools and kindergartens. But what is the interesting thing is in Denmark is this was like a litmus test for the best and for the worst, like a test of can we really practice outdoor in kindergartens and schools without any problems? And of course, no. So as a researcher, what I have seen through the last couple of months is some great examples of when it's not working and when it's working at its best. And those are the experiences, the collective experiences we have to build upon for developing an even better practice in the kindergartens. However, I must say that many children in Denmark, they come outside, of course, not as often as we as researchers wished they would. But and we can see that throughout the last 3 generations, the use of the outdoors for children has decreased. So my perspective here is that schools and daycare institutions play an important role in providing outdoor opportunities for children. So we have to learn from the experiences during the COVID-19. So this kind of sparked the use in Denmark. In Denmark, we have this new Curriculum Daycare Act in 2018, and it was quite an interesting act because it supported the use of play even more than it was in the old act, and especially it supported the use of the outdoors. There's 6 themes in this act, and one of the curriculum themes is focusing on the use of outdoors and friluftsliv, the Norwegian concept of friluftsliv, outdoor life, you can say, and using the outdoors for exploring, like biology exploration, science exploration of the outdoors. So now the pedagogues, they have to use the outdoors. Of course, they did it before, but it's very clear now that they need to go out there and they need to take advantage of those opportunities in the local environment, but it could also be in green areas at the kindergarten ground. And play is a very important concept in the curriculum themes, across the themes. So using the outdoors for stimulating play is very important. And in Denmark, that's an important point too. In Denmark, we do see that the quality in doing outdoor education in kindergartens is a way of finding a balance between the child-led approaches and the teacher or pedagogue staff-led approaches. So we have some goals. We still need to practice pre-literacy skills and so on, but the children, they also have to experience and go into the environment by themselves and have some experiences not guided by the teachers. So it's a balance, you can say. We do not focus very much on risky play in Denmark. It is like it is quite common just to support it. Children have to go out in the environments and often the natural environments to try their bodies out and get scratches and everything and climb trees. We are not that aware of it. However, discussions are coming up in Denmark on how to support risky play, because that is not all children who have those opportunities, and it really depends on the kindergarten staff to be supportive for activities promoting risky play. So it's legal, and the curriculum themes, this act actually supported. So that's an interesting point from the perspective abroad from Denmark.
Thank you so much, Mads.
You're welcome.
Aliza, would you be able to share your 3 key insights?
Sure, thanks. My name is Aliza. I'm currently in the ancestral lands of the Puyallup tribe in Tacoma, Washington. And yeah, so for us in Washington, our context is very different. Risky play is something that we are in some ways like fighting tooth and nail for through a number of different processes that address both liability and also teacher competencies around supporting risky play, because it's not something that is so ubiquitously embedded into our culture. We also have pretty diverse landscapes in Washington state. You know, on one side of the state, it's the wet, rainy, but it's also pretty temperate. And then on the other side, it can get very extreme heat and cold weather. So for us, our main process has been through licensing. We've had this pilot project for the past 3 years where we've developed alternative safety standards and processes for outdoor spaces that are leading to the same levels of safety as one could expect in a more traditional indoor space or cultivated playground. And so far those have actually been pretty successful. The pilot's been going for a couple of years. For us, it's very much about process and documentation. So we do ask that any program develop risk assessment policies and risk mitigation practices, that these are written down in the staff handbooks, that all staff see it. Staff and parents have to sign off that they've all seen it. And these are ways that we not only address liability, but also use it as a tool for education and sharing information, because it is something that, not everybody comes with an understanding of when, maybe they think, yeah, I'd love to have my kids outside, but, if it's raining, I want them inside, or, people still need a bit of conversation around how to support children to be outside in all different types of weather. That's not something that is consistent. And in Washington, we do have many people who are very outdoorsy, very outdoors oriented, who do understand this. And then we also have a lot of immigrant populations who are, less likely to want to be outside. And then of course, we also have our Indigenous populations and our tribes who have been actually really very, really very supportive and instrumental in this pilot project. So one of our first licensed outdoor preschool programs is provided by the Squaxin Island tribe. And so seeing that community really kind of take it on and show people it does work, we can keep kids safe. But not only that, they actually have started, or last year they were collecting data on children's behavioral challenges, either inside or outside, because they would have kids both inside and outside. And it was pretty astonishing, actually, the positive and pro-social behaviors that children were exhibiting outside. There was no incidents compared to 18 incidents of challenging behavior indoors from the same children in the same time period. So, you know, initial results like that, we also have had no injuries, no serious injuries reported by any of the pilot programs that are a result of, you know, being outdoors. One child broke a finger because another child dropped a log on her, but broken bones are actually pretty normal in early childhood. So, you know, we are currently at the point of making the case to our legislature about the success of the pilot. It technically ends in the summer of next year. But one of the, you know, aside from all of the benefits that children get and that communities get from being outdoors pre-COVID, because those are pretty significant as well. With COVID, yes, there is also the reduced transmission. And one of the things that I think is another, you know, pathway forward to make the case is about using the outdoors from a trauma-informed perspective and actually really highlighting it as a space for promoting healing from the pandemic and the impacts of it.
Thank you so much, Aliza. Danielle, may we go to you for your 3 insights?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Alphonse. My native name is Castanowat, and I share that name with my late grandmother, Philomena Alphonse. And I am Cowichan on my mother's side, and I'm Kanawaki Welsh and Scottish on my father's side. And I reside on Wasanic territory, that's Brentwood Bay in Vancouver Island. And today I'm on an unceded territory of the Souk Nation. So I'm really just grateful for this time and this morning to share really important insights about the development and rethinking and the transformation of early childhood and the importance and the level of needed to sort of think about the futures of our children and what they're going to be looking at in their environment. So from that ecological and Indigenous perspective, the 3 things that keep coming to my mind are building attachment. So attachment, thinking about the attachment theory and thinking about attachment to land. And that rolls into sustainability and sort of that relationship of children feeling connected and understanding their role of supporting the environment. And the third piece that really is probably one of the pieces that I always like to consider and think about is spiritual development. So that spiritual development in relationship with land, ocean, trees, animals, plants, all our medicines, sort of in reconnecting to our ancestral ties through the names, through our language. So language comes into place. And then overarching that piece is thinking about the policies that are already in place and how do we sort of put more action towards the policies that are already speaking to land. And that can tie into the Truth and Reconciliation, that can tie into the UN rights of Indigenous children. And if you look at the UN Sustainable Goals, there's lots of key places where early childhood is looking at supporting the environment and connection to nature and land. And so those pieces sit together. But when I sit down and think about children and think about their, like, just when I go back to hearing the experiences from the previous speakers, there's a real insight when you see children in play and they're learning and outside. There is something that is happening for them developmentally as well, that's not just inside the classroom. And I see that with our little grandbaby when we go out and we walk in the Gold Stream, and there's that self-regulation that happens for her. There's attachment. I talked to her about introducing her name to the trees and sharing who she is, where she's from, and making friends with the trees and talking to the ocean. And there's certain words that we use for the ocean and the rivers. And that is, for her spirit, her spiritual place of connection and feeling interconnected. And then also recognizing the beauty in nature and how there's depth of teachings that can come through in belonging, friendships, all those pieces. And so from that Indigenous perspective, we have a lot of, I want to say, what's the word? I can't think of the word right now, but there's a deep-seated responsibility to how we look after the land and how we belong to the land and how we hold the knowledge from the land. And intergenerationally, translation of all those teachings from gathering to season, they all are very key pieces for children to learn, and all children, to create that global citizenship, to create that sort of global effort of that collectivity of looking at the land. And I think the pandemic has sort of illuminated that piece. It's sort of created space. It's sort of slowed down time so that we can come back to nature, come back to the planet, come back to Earth, to really recognize the important aspects of our spiritual space and being in community, and what does that really mean, and being in relationship with the land. So those are the three things that sort of came to my mind. And then I was really interested in when you were talking about trauma informed. And I really see that also with children, in the sense of there's a different sense for children being outdoors, and that if they do have trauma, that it does create space for them to sort of help regulate, breathe, have more space. And I definitely think that's really key. And when I was thinking about the truth and reconciliation, because a lot of times people will bring up truth and reconciliation, and that's from the 2015, and the 12th one speaks to early childhood. But if you think about reconciliation and healing and truth, the truth is connected to the land, so the land and the history. So thinking about the past, present, and future, how do you incorporate all those pieces for thinking about, oh, sorry, there's a sound. So just thinking of, oh, I got the flower. So just, again, I think there's pieces with the truth and reconciliation, and that there is connection to the past, present, and future, and thinking about land, and thinking about healing, and thinking about early childhood and learning.
Thank you so much. Such a challenging task for all of you to say so much in this time. Really appreciate it. And may I turn it over to Aron for your 3 insights.
Thank you. So as everyone knows, I'm the lawyer on this webinar. So I'm the person who's supposed to talk about risk and litigation and all those scary things that I think put up too many impediments, in my view, to the work you folks are trying to do. So let me first say that my goal is to reassure you folks. My goal is to unmask or unpackage some of these issues from my perspective, and let you know that when it comes to people like me, we value all of this greatly in our personal lives. And therefore, for me, it's really easy to advocate in this circumstance in the event that I'm dealing with an actual situation that results in some type of a lawsuit. So what I really want to try to do is just unpackage some of this. And the first insight I want to give to you folks is that in the world of COVID-19 and efforts to bring kids outdoors to play, and efforts to bring in informed consents, and efforts to deal with how we're going to do all of these things, lawyers don't know. We don't know the outcomes. So any lawyer tells you they know the outcomes and this is the way to do it, there's no magic here. We're just trying our best, like everybody else, to deal with a situation that's unfolding in front of us, and dealing with what we know, and trying to apply our knowledge to how you folks can essentially do what you're trying to do and what we support you in doing. So that's my first insight, is that the lawyers don't know any more, in my view, than you do about what the potential outcomes may be of all of this. For me, the reality is that I deal with the hindsight. I deal with the consequences of an incident that may occur. And another insight I'll give you is that because we're dealing with early childhood education, kids that are quite young, in British Columbia, the age of majority is 19, the United States is 18. Alberta is 18. So the reality is that a child can get injured, or I guess in this case, sick at age 5 and sue at age 21. So we are shaping policy now that lawsuits that may occur later won't influence. So my point there is that, again, we don't know the outcomes, and the litigation that may result, and I hope never will, from any of this situation will only shape future policy procedure. It won't shape the current policy procedure. So what you folks are doing now, hopefully with some of my help and others like me, is essentially setting your own standards. And what I want to make sure you do, and I always say this in these presentations, is don't be aspirational. Set a standard to which you can comply. And when it comes to how we deal with those standards, and you know, for people like Mads in a country with a much different legal system, you know, it's kind of sometimes hard to appreciate some of this. But in the United States and Canada with our tort systems, you know, we have to deal with this issue of standard of care and duty of care. And so when you're doing this work that you're doing, and you're doing a great job, and it's so complicated and challenging, you're setting up these standards for later, if and when someone has to assess a situation. I hope that the standards you're setting up too make things very safe, but not risk-free. Because the bottom line is that there has to be risk. Because without risk, what's the point? We can't control every risk. So that's my other piece of this, is that the standards you set, in my opinion, even with COVID-19, can't be risk-free. And we are dealing with children, particularly young children, who probably can't really wear masks, if that's something you want to try to do, or are going to struggle with physically distancing from each other. That's fine from my perspective. And my perspective is that the parents get to make a choice. And the parents' choices are fairly simple. Are you comfortable with this process that we're doing or not? And in my view, the insight I can provide is that as long as, in my view, the parents and everyone else comes in with an open mind to what the program is going to be and what it will involve, the reality, as Aliza is saying, is there won't be any physical incidents most likely, or they're quite minor. And in my experience, for early childhood education, the incidents are very rare. In fact, outdoors, I can think of only 2 cases in my entire legal career of an outdoor claim coming to my desk, both on playgrounds, not hiking in the woods. So from my perspective, the risk of COVID is low and the risk of injury is low. So there's every reason for educators, to the extent that they can find ways to educate in the outdoors, to utilize that resource that we have for all the reasons that you folks are more capable than me of discussing from your perspectives. The cases that I frankly see typically are indoors, wood shop, welding shop, things that obviously include risk, but for some reason people seem less concerned about than the outdoor play. So those are the insights that came to my mind. And I guess my main point for the group is there's no magic to any of this. And I'm just trying my best to help you folks with my insights understand that we can try to unpack all of this as far as litigation wise, but please carry on with the work you're doing.
Thank you, Aron. So much to listen to across all 4 of our speakers. And I wondered if it's always helpful to know what meaningful idea did the panelists hear as they were listening across each other. And I wonder, in just 2 or 3 minutes, Danielle, what did you hear? A meaningful idea.
I really appreciated hearing everyone's perspectives and different where each of the lenses come from. And Aron, like, just hearing from that legal perspective, it sort of helps to think about how do you develop policies in early childhood, and what does that look like for consent for children. And Aliza, like, I just love hearing the experiences that you're having. I think that it's helpful, because I think that the more that we hear about them, the more validity that we have in recognizing that this is very important. And this is a piece of early childhood that we need to think about in the future. And Mads, like, I just really appreciate also how you connected to the pandemic and talked about how in your country, how you're seeing the involvement for parents to see nature, and also that parent piece. So parents are not just educators, that there's also a family component of education about nature and the recognition of the importance of the land and how to be together in community. So I think those all tie in together, and they sort of intersect in thinking about the importance and the need for change. And I think that if we go back into the past, nature was always part of, if you think of everyone here on this panel and everyone that's listening, what was your favorite experiences outdoors? Those recollection of memories and those pieces, I don't believe, would it be always inside? I don't think so. A lot of the times when we go back to our vacations or to places in our childhood memories, it's climbing in the tree, it's being near the ocean, it's being by the river. And I think that that's also, if you go back to that, I think then that sort of also creates that alignment and sort of helps you to really recognize how important nature plays in our self-identity, self-concept, connection to community, all those pieces.
Thank you, Danielle. Aron, what did you hear listening across?
Well, first of all, these sessions for me are more about the practitioners and the educators than me from my perspective. I really appreciated hearing from Mads, his perspective from another world apart from us as far as what is happening there and his own connections and how he's observing people get back to nature as part of this, as a kind of a hidden benefit of all of this. There's always hidden benefits that I'm trying to kind of grasp onto personally from COVID-19. And that's one of them I've observed as well, is that, I look around my neighborhood here and the kids are outside more. Hearing from Aliza, just the behavioral aspects that they're observing and studying as to how kids in the outdoors with behavioral issues are behaving better outdoors than indoors. That's, to me, pretty important research. And for that to become part of our reality, I think is going to be really important going forward.
Thank you. Mads, what did you hear?
I just have to unmute, sorry. First of all, thank you all you others for the insights. It's always interesting to hear the arguments of for why the outdoors is used in preschools and school settings across countries, because the arguments can be very different, and to the research, because the research are also led by the ideology in the country. So in Denmark, the focus on health is very important these days, because when you go outside, you need to consider there's some health benefits. And that's made me thinking about you, Aron, and your insights as a lawyer, because it's so important for me to hear this, because in Denmark we can sometimes think that this is the way we do, and there's no other ways of thinking, or no other ways of thinking how to integrate outdoors around the globe. And of course, there's some considerations about risks that we don't have, but we will maybe have these considerations in the future. I can guarantee you that in 10, 20 years from now, we will see some of the same examples. So I actually think, even though Denmark is sometimes referred to as a country of reference in using outdoors, we could also learn something about how to deal with these kind of issues in the future, because I think we will see them.
Thank you, Mads. And Aliza, what meaningful idea did you hear?
Well, I guess kind of similarly to what other people have said, but it does just really drive home for me the importance of making policy that makes sense in practice. and policy that supports best practice. So, you know, like what is the line that connects liability and law to spiritual pedagogy, and like, and drawing that line, I think for people is just, you know, really exciting. And I'm also just really excited that so many people in different contexts are doing this, because I know that it influences me and benefits my work and efforts immensely as well. So I'm just enjoying being a part of this global community that is, just really trying to embed some of the best of what we do for our youngest and most precious beings on this planet. So that's really, really beautiful to me. So I took away.
That's beautifully said. Thank you. And I will remind all of you who are listening at home or wherever you are, if you do want to add some questions for our panelists, please feel free to use the chat, and Belva is kindly keeping track of those so that we can bring them to the fore and ask them as well, as many as we can. I would like to ask a few more questions that came from our organizing committee, if I could. And Mads, perhaps I'll start with you again, 2 or 3 minutes. This question that, you know, perhaps Denmark is like Canada in some senses, where with citizens who feel both at ease in outdoor contexts and citizens who feel uncomfortable outdoors, something that Aliza spoke to as well. Mads, based on your work, how does an educator who is less familiar and or comfortable outdoors become comfortable outdoors?
I would like to point out a special consideration in the new Daycare Act, and this is peer-to-peer learning. When we are starting up research projects in Denmark, and we do because we are very interested in becoming more knowledge on how the outdoors can foster, for instance, physical activity and pre-literacy skills. And when we speak to the kindergartens, the leaders say, can you add a peer-to-peer component? Because there are some very experienced pedagogues and kindergartens, and we have to learn from them. When we, in 2000 and I have to remember, 14, started a new school act in Denmark, we were very much inspired by Toronto school system, I think it was. And there was some kind of demonstration schools set up. So some very experienced schools, they could become like a point of reference for other schools who want to expand their knowledge. So I think as a researcher, that this could be a very important way of dealing with the expertise and spreading the word. So this is how we're going to work in the upcoming research projects in Denmark. And I think that could be a suggestion for starting up good practices, and also how you deal with risky play in one preschool or kindergarten could be transferred to other kindergartens as well.
Thank you. Aron, how might educators think about risk to help them move beyond their own fears of liability?
Well, the fears is I think, a very challenging question. I think it's easier for me to address the fears than kind of the risk issue. The reality is that you can't stop someone from suing you. That's the way the system in British Columbia and in Canada works. That's the way the system in the United States works as well. What you then end up with a situation is a lawsuit. So the way that I think you deal with risk on the front end is the policy procedures you put in place and the informed consents you put in place. And as I said earlier, making them realistic and not aspirational. And then the practical issues from there are simpler. Insurance is, of course, the best risk management tool you can have. Incorporating, if you're running a business, that business is a tool you should employ. Relying upon the organization you're with, whether it be a school, district, or otherwise, to know how that works in operation, because I think there's some fears out there about how persons who end up in a situation might be treated by a school district, for example, or by a university, for example. And I think that that needs to be unpackaged and unmasked better for educators than it is currently. I guess my reassurance here is that on the end of all of this, if you appreciated my perspective, there's people like me out there who are trying to make sure that you're reassured. And in the event something happens, we just deal with it. We go and do the work, and we do our best to deal with the situation and make something good out of it.
Thank you, Aron. Aliza, sorry. Washington State had a head start on licensing outdoor early childhood education, and your pilot has given you an opportunity to put what we've been talking about essentially into practice. What advice would you have as we think of our next steps in licensing outdoor early childhood education programs? And what's the most important thing you think we should keep in mind? Just a small question.
Yeah, just a little one. Well, I think that what you're doing right now with 135 people on this roundtable is a pretty good step, because it is in so many ways a web of practice and support, right? So there's the government policy work that you can do, but then there's also the teacher preparation, professional development. There's all of those supports that I think are really essential, and kind of get to the question you just asked Aron, which is, how do you support teachers in their feelings of risk? And, it's about helping people feel knowledgeable and competent to themselves be outside, which is one thing. And then also to be excited about and know what the pedagogy is that works outside. So I guess just as you are, working it through your regulations, also consider how you are going to disseminate practices and train the staff that are going to be putting it into place. Because, once you go outside, it's the adults that are doing it, that are making it fun, that are making it safe. So, really investing in the systems to support them.
Thank you. Danielle, how might we see the land as teacher for children and educators? And what guidance could non-Indigenous educators glean from Indigenous educators?
Really good question. I also noticed in the Q&A that Maury asked a question about the connection to land and how that's reflected in practice and where is it located and what have I noticed and seen. At Seashalt Child Care Center, they have, they go to the ocean every day and they spend a lot of time. And if you look at their outdoor play, it's very nature-based. And I think that's what is evolving through just like the typical outdoor space. It's starting to more incorporate more natural elements. And Mari, I was thinking about language, like from the past, present, and future, sort of intertwining it by using my language is Halkaminam. So using the Halkaminam to really understand the name of a plant or a tree, like a cedar tree is Haipe. And so when we talk to the tree, that's what we use for when we gather medicine or use our cedar for traditional uses, and the stories that have been in the past and how to bring them back into the future with sharing with children and connecting them to the land and in the spaces and what had happened in the past, specifically at different rivers, and commonly in sort of the Western idea, we talk about the salmon run. But there's lots of stories that go with the salmon run, and there's lots of connection with the trees and the salmon. And I think that, again, to disconnect the idea about separation of Indigenous to non-Indigenous. Because I think if we're all living on land that's Indigenous to certain ancestors, then we create more attachment and more connection. When we have that disassociation, detachment, saying, oh, we're separate, then there's this sense of distance, that distance of wanting or connecting or belonging. And I want to create more connection. And I think that we have to look at it collectively together, globally, and thinking about Indigenous and non-Indigenous sort of merging together and thinking about our consciousness and intentions with nature.
Thank you. Belva, just to give you a heads up in a moment, I'm going to come to you and ask if there are some questions emerging from the chat. But before I do that, I wondered if any of the panelists had a question they'd like to ask one of the other panelists. Go ahead, Mats. Mats and then Aliza.
Thank you. I just wonder a question to you, Aliza. How much do you work together as researcher and praxis to develop praxis? Because these are some of the considerations right now in Denmark. How could we bring together research and practice even more to develop a better praxis and raise quality in delivering outdoor education programs? So what are the experiences from your perspective?
Yeah, well, we spent about a year developing the outdoor preschool pilot standards. And so involved in that was a lot of bringing sort of research and best practice for early childhood education generally. We did look to other countries. I actually went to Norway with some faculty from University of Washington to observe some other programs and practice. So even at the very beginning, it was research informed, and we would, I also looked at kind of outdoor safety practices for children older than early childhood education, right? Just like these outdoor wilderness skills kind of stuff. And so one of the kind of limitations that I have is I'm technically involved in program development. So I am not personally allowed to be doing child impact studies. I also don't have the capacity or bandwidth to do that while also doing all the other stuff. So having partnerships with both the programs themselves to do their own kind of on-site research, like I mentioned before, there's one around behavior, but we do also have partnerships in the health community who are doing research sort of as the pilot is happening on the impacts on children's health, like obesity or sleep patterns. So yeah, that in particular, and then some of the data we're collecting regardless is around injuries and incidents, of which there have been very few. And then also some programs, because they are also involved in some of our subsidy programs, they do also have to do child outcome assessments. So we use in Washington State something called Teaching Strategies Gold. That's a child assessment tool that they do, and it's something that we do in Washington to ensure that programs have children ready for kindergarten. And so we can draw on some of that data as well to say, okay, well, in these outdoor programs, children are meeting the same benchmarks for kindergarten readiness as in all of our other publicly funded pre-K programs.
Thank you. And Aliza, I think you also had a question for another panelist.
Yeah, Danielle, I would love to hear you talk more about this idea of, I'm probably going to fumble over the words, but like re-indigenizing people with that sense of like belonging to where they are, right? Like when I think about wanting to honor and support everyone to be learning about the tribal cultures of the place where they live, the ancestral kind of indigeneity, and then also instill that sense of belonging of oneself to the land. So I would just love to hear more about that. That's something I'm curious about.
Well, I think it started for me when I started thinking about that, when I started thinking about indigenization through post-secondaries and seeing that tension and seeing that gap of connection. And so that's when I sort of just thought about, if we sat and really thought about where we're sitting on in the land, how many years have we been on the land, if we grew up in that territory, then we are part of that land. And so I think that's where I really wanted to change that mindset and that sort of disconnect that some people may have, and that if we think in that global citizenship place of thinking about Indigenous knowledge and sharing knowledge and that mutual place of appreciation, I think then if we come to that sort of, again, true intentions and coming to that, how do I say it? Again, I just come to spirit, coming to spirit. So coming to truth and coming to spirit, and yeah, that's, I don't know, Aliza, like when you're asking, like it's such a big question. And when I think about it, I think about how do I express just wanting to connect and thinking, and I always speak about, like when I teach, I think I'd always talk about, because a lot of there's this feeling of fear about teaching Indigenous knowledge or sharing Indigenous knowledge or multi-nations, right? So there's lots of children that are coming from maybe on Vancouver Island, there could be Kwakiwak, Coast Salish, Nuu-Chulnith, and sort of we're merging together. So then there's this disconnect because we don't want to share different aspects because we're trying to, there's a bit of fear. So breaking that fear apart and just finding that connection. And does that make sense? I feel like it's sort of a full kind of place, but it's also this place of just trying to change the mindset and thinking about our responsibility on land and recognition. I think when we have that acknowledgement of the ancestors and the nations, coming from that place of having respect and acknowledgement, then there can come to a place of this friendship and this true relationship with the land and with the community. Is that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. Having that like acknowledgement first of kind of everybody's histories kind of brings us into this present moment. And then you kind of start from there with your relationship with one another and with the land.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Thank you both. Belva, I know you've been keeping your eyes on the chat to see questions that are emerging and that you were going to sort of pull some of them together for us. Can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. I just want to take a minute to thank our panelists for being so on it. We've had many questions come up in the chat and our panelists have answered them directly, which is fabulous. So thank you for being on top of that. I appreciate it. We have, there are some fascinating questions, but a lot of them are logistical questions. And I thought and they're important logistical questions on how, and I'm going to broad stroke it and put it towards, maybe Aliza, and of how can we offer children structure outside? What kind of materials might we need? And again, I find these important because I field a lot of these questions myself. But how do you merge indoor to outdoor? Is there a recommendation on what the space might look like? We'll start there. And then I have one more question after that that's a bit more complicated. Thank you.
So is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, definitely you want to consider the space. So what seems to be most successful for programs is they have identified kind of a meadow with some natural boundaries like hedging, or maybe there's a fence if it's a park, but some kind of space that feels contained even though it's outside. And that is the place where families come and drop their kids off. Similarly to what you would do in a regular early childhood center, you have kind of centers or things set up to draw them in and help them transition into that space. So, you know, you might have a picnic blanket with some books, or maybe you brought some shovels, or, you know, it's interest-led. So whatever, you know, the children will find interesting and want to be engaged with, that's how you start. Usually you give families like a half hour-ish to do that. You have your morning circle, you go over your safety, stuff, and you have a daily schedule. You know, maybe it works that after that you go for your hike, wherever you need to be for lunch, probably make a stop at the bathrooms before you do that. Yeah, so you definitely do want to consider those things. And a way of thinking about it that has been helpful to me is called Affordance Theory. And so you think about like, well, what are the affordances of these spaces, both educationally and also in terms of care, like is there shade, heat, water, you know, etc.
I noticed, thank you so much, Aliza. Mads, I noticed you wanted to add something.
Yes, it's quite interesting for Danish school teachers using the outdoors, because one of my colleagues, she's investigating them when they start up as quite new teachers. And what we see is they bring a backpack with a lot of stuff to be able to teach their curriculum outside in the youngest, with the youngest children. However, when they become more experienced, they leave this backpack behind, because they experience that you don't need that much. Of course, you need water and some of the more practical gear outside, but we have to recognize that having something in your backpack and having the backpack provides like a safety, a support to use, so you can use it to stick to it, saying, okay, I have my things, so I will manage. And then you can leave it afterwards when you get more experience. That is some experiences from starting up in Denmark, but it is in schools when I'm speaking about this.
Thank you. Belva, one more quick question.
Sure. I just noticed there's a new one in here. Okay, how about this one? It's a complicated one, but I think it's a good one. Canada has a history, this is from Kaylee, of anti-Indigenous policies and practices. Sometimes I think that well-intentioned educators, less familiar with the TRC, might emphasize individual human rights principles in our programs at the expense of recognizing collective Indigenous rights. Are there insights about how educators can spot these tendencies in our practices and help educate the next generation about Indigenous rights? And I, as a settler, am very curious about this question. Danielle, thank you. Big one. Thanks, Kaylee.
Danielle, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was talking and I didn't see that I was still muted, so apologies. I'm just going to say that's an incredible question, and it's something that I really think that we do need to think about and consider and unpack. And I don't know if I can fully answer that question because I'm just sitting with it. I'm just thinking this is so important. That's a really good question. And that's true. And I've talked to elders, Florence James and Marlene Rice and Cowichan, and in offering and guidance and our understanding about what truth and reconciliation really means. And what does it mean from the early childhood sector? And what does it mean to incorporate it in thinking about education, curriculum, and program development? And those pieces, I think, need to be sort of like in all of the policies to really think about how are we really making this an action item what does that really mean from an educator, from our guidance strategy to understanding our place in the world and our positionality of where we are from the present, from understanding the past and the history of Canada, to really think about how we want to create Indigenous futurisms. And that sort of, that again, that switching that mindset of that collectively, that we're all in this together and thinking about how do we acknowledge and respect Indigenous knowledges. And, you know, another question is, how do we incorporate it if you don't have that lens? And that's always that question of building relationship within communities and within, and looking for people that in organizations such as BC Aboriginal Childcare Society, Aboriginal Head Start, that's sort of in that sort of Canadian perspective to sort of build relationship and understanding all the work that's being done from that Indigenous lens. And that also, I think that I feel like I can't unpack the whole question, but I love that question and I really want to hold on to it. So I'm wondering if I can come back to it and sit with it, and maybe also get guidance from elders to sort of think about how does this answer look? And I think it needs to, I do feel like I need to bring it forward and then also come back to it.
Thank you. Thank you for your generosity in taking the questions beyond the panels and into community. Appreciate that. I can't believe it, but we're already at the point where I have to ask each of our panelists if they could, just reflecting back, maybe spend just 2 minutes each summarizing 1 or 2 what you feel are really important considerations to help BC move forward with licensing outdoor early childhood education now. Aron, could I start with you?
So from a legal perspective, I can tell you that one thing that people probably aren't aware of is that policy in law remains an overriding issue or consideration for the courts in any case. So what we're doing now, in my view, is vitally important because we are essentially putting together the policy argument that we made later for anything that may arise in the courts about some situation that occurs down the road. So please carry on from my perspective in doing the research, doing the work, and getting our kids out there in the place they should be to grow and learn. And then if and when I'm involved, I will have all this information to work with to make sure that the right outcomes occur.
Thank you. Aliza.
I don't really think I have much else to say. I think you guys are doing great. Keep going. It is going to be a long process, and I think, you know, something that I reflect on is how these kind of more dry aspects of licensing and policy really are steps along the way to these healed relationships between people and land and between cultures. And so I think, you know, keep going, keep taking steps. It's not a short road, but it's definitely one of the most meaningful.
And Aliza, if I could just ask sort of a follow-up to that, one of our panelists had been curious about for the pilot, you know, what did not happen that you feel would have been important to have happened, you know, almost as a cautionary tale for us to be thinking about as we move forward.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy with how it went. I think if it, yeah. I think some of the challenges maybe that I had or have had is making sure that we can allow for campfires. That in terms of like the conversations with our like legal precedents took like 6 months. So I think that that's an important aspect of nature-based education. You know, I think actually this is just a truth with COVID. I don't know about y'all, but in Washington, our budget is really going to struggle and is struggling now because of the economic impacts of that. And so, you know, budget and government work was already kind of an issue. And so, you know, really just consider what means you do have at your disposal and prioritize.
Thank you. And I'm also really glad to hear that it went just the way you wanted. That's a wonderful thing to be able to say. Thank you. Danielle.
I think just collectively, even with the group that's listening, just that community, building that sustainable community of support, and also that global information from Denmark and from the work that you're doing, Aliza. So again, pulling together research. And I would really also encourage aligning that research with Indigenous knowledges, because I think that that's a key aspect of connecting from that Canadian perspective, the importance and the validity of why land is important to our children and to our families and to community.
Thank you. And Mads.
Yeah, I don't have much to add from Denmark regarding the legal matters, because we don't have experiences in that. However, I still think it's very important what you're saying, Danielle, regarding combining research and praxis and the citizens. So what I would recommend with our experiences from a graded demonstration projects, not in kindergartens, but in school systems, is to come together, policy, research and praxis, and set some common goals and scaling it up. So you cannot manage to get the best practice for everyone at the same time, but you have to build upon the good experiences from those kindergartens and preschools. So that is the recommendation from the research and projects I have been involved into. But I really appreciate your work you're doing. It's amazing, and we will certainly look abroad and to British Columbia to see how it's developing, because we can learn so much in Denmark too from implementing ideas like this.
And because remarkably, thank you, Mads, remarkably, we do have, I think, 2 extra minutes. I wonder, Belva, were there any other questions that emerged that you really think we would bring to the panelists?
Oh, you know, yeah, yes. Here we go. There was a question that I wanted to add on to the last one we had with Danielle. And a valuable question was asked: as a settler, is it appropriate for us to teach Indigenous words in our programs, even if we're not connected to our local tribe?
Yeah, I was hoping to answer that question because I noted it, but I'm unsure of the protocol of and listening and being present. So I was really hoping that it would come up. And I really want to thank that person for bringing that question up, because I think it's an important one as well. And in thinking about from an early childhood perspective and understanding the brain development for children up to age 6 about language, I always encourage every language for children to learn, because we know that they have the capacity and the ability to learn multiple languages. And I really encourage that from that Canadian perspective, because the fact of the matter is that we're losing our language. Our language is dying, and that language that's dying is losing the teachings from their land. And so I think that also when you're, again, trying to reconnect, instead of feeling this disconnect or that tension that there's this piece of not feeling attached to land and our responsibilities about language. And from, you know, and I try to just take away that settler part and thinking about, well, how will this language come about? How can I bring language forward? And how can I do it in a good way? There's always this piece of respect and acknowledgement. So if you keep acknowledging the respect and acknowledge the territory, the nation, there's the respect there. It's already given. The land hears it, the ancestors hear it. So there's that connection already there. And if you do that, that's really key. And the other piece is First Voices. First Voices is another organization that is focused on language revitalization. So if there's disconnect with not being connected to the nations on the community of the land that the program is on, I would reach out to those organizations, specifically First Voices, to be able to sort of connect you to the right ways of sharing language and providing resources, and also encouraging First Nations languages in the program.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you all so much, panelists. I have really appreciated this time and your generosity and your answers. I'm going to turn it over now to Iris for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you all. Wow, there is so much for us to think about, so many really powerful questions that led into very powerful conversations. I actually would like to start by going back to Elder May's message about love and care for babies and children, because I think this is the ground that unites us. Just wanted to also very quickly say that while we're living in this time of pandemic and suffering, and we're very much separated from each other, as each one of you mentioned, in some miraculous way, the outdoor has transformed in our communities. And this is actually the place where we can connect to each other, but also to place, and it is the place where there is less risk for us to be infected by the virus. Aliza, I wanted to thank you for creating a path for us to follow. I also wanted to thank you for showing us that what we tend to think is impossible is actually possible. And also for reminding us about building this web of support. I think this is a really important message for us to keep in mind. And yes, this is exactly what we're trying to do now in the context of these roundtables. Meds, first of all, you bike to work. That's where I connected with you right away. And also it made it very visible how outdoor is it's a way of life in Denmark. Also wanted to thank you for mentioning the pedagogues, their knowledge and learning from lived experiences and the wisdom of the pedagogues. Aron, thank you so much for giving us the green light and supporting us from the legal perspective. And Danielle, I wanted to thank you. You started by saying that it is about transforming early childhood education, and I can't agree more. But I also think that what you're teaching us, that it is about transforming what the outdoor is. So we tend to think about the outdoor as something that gives us things, but you early on talked about our deep-seated responsibility to the land, the water, and air, and how the way to cultivate this responsibility is through embodied and spiritual relationship with plants, animals, soil, etc. So I really wanted to thank you for shifting our thinking about the outdoor as something that doesn't only give to us, but as something that we actually care for and give back to. There's so much more that I could thank you for, but I know that time is running out, and I wanted to mention our audience that this and the previous and the next virtual roundtable will be recorded. It will appear first as a video link on our website, but later on we're actually going to turn it into podcasts that you can take with you when you go for a walk outside. I wanted to thank Ellen for being our wonderful moderator, and to all of you for being here. And Kaylee, remind me if there's something that I'm forgetting.
I think that's good. Yeah, I posted the YouTube link in the chat here, and that's the first place that the video will pop up. And it's also where you can go find the video from our first session if you missed that. And you can share that with friends or family or coworkers who might also be interested in this work. And I just also want to thank all the panelists for all your wisdom that you've shared today.
So thank you again, and stay connected. Goodbye.
Thank you.